We start 2026 with a guest whom I conversed and interacted over many years and have learned a lot. My guest on this particular episode is Professor Chaitanya Athale. Chaitanya is a professor of biology at Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Pune, specializing in self-organization and self-morphogenesis biology. He also researches very interesting aspects of bringing biology and making it a little bit more quantitative in a laboratory situation, which is an equally important part of looking at how biology has evolved over the years. Chaitanya earned his PhD from University of Heidelberg and subsequently was a postdoc at Harvard, MIT in Boston, and also back in Heidelberg before joining IISER Pune in 2009. It happened so that Chaitanya was one of the first person whom I spoke to when I came to IISER Pune long time ago, even as a as a person who just was joining the institution. And it's my absolute delight to talk to Chaitanya because Chaitanya is not only a fascinating researcher and a scientist. He's also a writer, writes in Marathi, writes in English, and there are various facets of Chaitanya which we're going to actually, look at in this particular episode. So, with this introduction, I welcome Chaitanya to Pratidwani.
Thank you, Pawan. This is such a pleasure to be here. I have been following your posts, your blogs, and of course, your podcast. I admire the energy that sustains you, and I'm so thrilled to be here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Absolutely, my pleasure. So, Chaitanya, give us a gist of your origins, where were you born, and your background, and what really brought you to science.
So, I think this is a fascinating question, and I'm at that age probably where one reflects on these things a little bit more than one should, perhaps 50 plus. I was born in a hospital in Pune, and I think I have realized that my life tends to have like loops in them. So I was born in Pune, didn't live here for a long time, then came back, went off for a while, then came back, and so on and so forth. So these loops have intertwined me, and I think I was attracted to science first in those crazy things called libraries, and
Mm-hmm.
I think even today, if I have a quiet place that I would like to be in, it's a bookshop or a library. I mean, this is somehow. I mean, I feel really happy there. I was reminded of it because this winter break, I went to the library where I spent a large part of my youth, just 2 years perhaps, but not maybe a significant formative time, which happens to be an abandoned church, which is converted into a library inside a military cantonment in Calcutta
Mm-hmm.
and Fort William, as it's used to be called. And that library still exists. It has marvelous stained glass windows. It has, war memorabilia from Afghan campaigns of the British from 1800s. And then in the middle of all this are just books, books, books everywhere. And it's empty at the moment. There's no people reading at the moment, unfortunately. But it brought back a lot of memories. And the thing that I remember are these, I think, turn of the century books that I used to be obsessed about. Ironically, because these armed forces command libraries, as they're called, are all over the country, they more or less have similar collections. They have these British series called 100 Great X, and that X is discoverers,
Mm-hmm.
adventurers,
Mm-hmm.
travelers, historians. They had a book on scientists too. And I think for the longest time, my great ambition in life until maybe my eighth or ninth standard was to become what I thought was called discoverer. I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
that meant actually. So in the turn of the century English context, it was usually geographers,
Yes, yeah,
explorers,
yeah,
sort of like
explore.
naturalists, if you may call them, right? And I guess that was a natural turn towards biology as a result. Um, Except that then I was really fascinated by Isaac Asimov in
Mm-hmm.
my late youth, in my 10th standard, in that period. So there were a couple of books on what then became biotechnology. I mean, basically genetic engineering, nonfiction by Isaac Asimov, ironically, and uh, and I think that sort of took me around in turns and twists to do a bachelor's ironically in botany, which I don't work on anymore, then a master's in zoology, which I also don't do anymore.
That's interesting.
Uh, but in that process, somewhere, I think two bugs bit me: biochemistry and biomathematics. So biochemistry saved my soul in my bachelor's, because we had a lecturer who basically, with very little funding, in a corner in the bachelor's department in Ferguson College, which is also in Pune, um, he used to run small experiments. And until then, there was a tendency in undergraduate, and this is early 90s, so 1993 to 1996, that biology has to be useful. If it's not useful, it's not interesting. And so I I don't know what I did, some strange project extracting fuel like molecules or flammable molecules from some obscure arid plant. And then when I saw him doing biochemistry, I finally realized, my God, there's an actual science to it. It's not just grind it and do some strange, some
Mm.
trivial experiments. And then the second moment of inspiration was when, in my master's, we had a course called systems biology, where I suddenly realized all these very complex networks, biochemical networks, which we were studying. And as it so happens, I had to learn by heart. I mean,
Mm.
of
Mm.
course, I think I have colleagues who are maybe more chemically inclined, who understand the logic, but for me, it was often a problem. But for me, the thing that cracked that puzzle was when suddenly I saw differential equation models that could just simply capture the generality in such a succinct and condensed form that it then made sense how this complexity might be explained. And this set me off on a on a direction that I guess was not, I probably was not meant to go, because I had a training in molecular biology. I could clone genes, purify proteins. This was the happening thing. You could get a job for that. Even now, I could get a job for that
Mm.
in a company. And yeah, and that set me off on a search that finally has led me to realize that what I am is a biophysicist.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so, so, like I said, I think, what do they say? They not all who search are lost, but I think I still search,
Yeah, yeah.
and I enjoy that search of. I mean, this is why we are scientists, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Buckminster Fuller has a very beautiful quote. I might not be quoting exactly. He tells that I found something where I should be going by setting out to somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh
That's
boy, yeah,
yeah, yeah. This is it's a very beautiful concept what you mentioned. In fact, this realization and also kind of coming to the fore of understanding what one wants to do is not an easy question to answer.
yeah, absolutely.
And even for people who have spent reasonably long period of time, you really figure out as you proceed. And many a times, this thought of what you need to do sometimes might also turn out to be not so important question to ask at all the time, because you would be able to spend some time at some particular junction, and
Yeah.
then you realize what you are evolving into, and that sometimes takes you in a different path altogether.
Absolutely. So my PhD started in a very odd fashion, and this is maybe I should not be talking about this in a
Yeah, yeah, no,
public
no, no,
forum,
no.
but
You get.
essentially, I was in a biochemistry lab, and I
Mm,
had joined it with the aim, as I mentioned earlier,
mm,
of doing biomathematics on the biochemistry
mm,
in a cellular context, and this was a bit ambitious for me. I mean, I was not trained, not formally in dynamical systems.
mm,
I
mm,
had two courses ironically, in 1997 and 1998 at the zoology department, Pune University. I had a course in dynamical systems and ordinary differential equation models, which today does not get taught.
mm,
And
mm,
so, in a way, when I went initially to Switzerland, I realized that in terms of these conceptual frameworks, the training I'd had was far ahead of what typical traditional biologists were trained in. I also knew how to program a bit.
mhm.
I had self-taught myself, and a little bit of basic programming was taught in the university. Um, and at that point, I think this desire to integrate theory and experiments
Mm.
was very strong, but I didn't know how to do it, and that's pretty much why we need guides and mentors. And I think, for all sorts of reasons, I moved from that lab to a biomathematics lab in Germany. So I was in Switzerland for about a year and a half.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in Bern, which is a very beautiful city, if
Mm.
you ever go there. I mean,
Mm.
by the way, Albert Einstein spent his time there
They say yes, yes.
as Patentanwalt, as they say,
Mm.
no, patent examiner, I think,
Mm.
right? Also, a couple of really famous artists,
Mm.
and in the context of that period in the 1930s, Central Europe. Bern has now, meaning after the war, adopted Judaism as one of the
Oh,
official religions. It's one of the
interesting.
rare cantons that really did make an effort to, I think, protect its minorities and so on. But anyway, I moved to Heidelberg because I'd heard about Heidelberg. I'd gone backpacking
Mm.
I think 3 years prior to that. It was kind of an exciting place. And I worked, ironically, with an applied mathematician who had
Wow.
recruited all kinds of people in his lab. So people like me who were trained in biochemistry, molecular biology. So I could clone proteins and purify them.
Mm.
That's what I did
Mm.
in Bern for a very long time. And there were engineers who were um, computer science engineers. And then there were physicists, largely the majority of the lab, in fact. And in this sort of pot, we were all thrown together, and we were all very confused. We were doing all kinds of things. I said what today you may call big data analytics. I mean,
Mm.
in biology, which is very fashionable and trendy. But this is year 2000, so the I mean, this was in a way maybe ahead of its time in
Mm.
some senses, because data was not as easily available. People were not sure how what would and would not work. And I was put to a project which essentially involved some spatial transport processes inside cells, and this idea of ordinary differential equation biochemical kinetics then mapped onto space essentially meant I had to get some sense also of partial differential equations, which
Mm.
got things a little more complicated, as you can imagine, and make measurements. I mean, this was ambitious, and with a lot of ambitious projects, I guess one may not always see the fruits of one's work right away.
Mm.
But I learned a lot, and I think I had an amazing postdoc mentor who basically told me that, look, I mean, if you need to program quickly, and we were programming in Basic, Visual Basic,
Mm.
C, and things that were really taking a lot of time to see outcomes. And he said, take MATLAB. MATLAB is an easy tool. It's an
Mm.
engineer's favorite tool. And that's when the bug of MATLAB bit me. We actually, ironically, in year 2000, 3 people in the lab tried Python, numerical
Wow. Okay.
modules in Python, and we found even sign functions were not consistent,
Mm.
backward compatible. Like the new version would release and the old versions wouldn't
Mm.
work, and so we were like, oh god, this is not going to work for us. And now, ironically, the thing has come back in a
Come
full
back.
circle for me, because now 2025, I mean, almost none of our code is written in MATLAB anymore
Yeah.
because we have backward compatibility problems,
Mm.
ironically. So, I mean, I have no problems with MATLAB, by the way, not personally,
Yeah.
obviously, but it's a matter of also being able to distribute the code and be
Mm.
able to share it. And there's been a sea of change that I've noticed, like in these 25 years. I feel really old now, but the attitude towards scientific code has changed so dramatically from when I started, where people would write small functions and hide it, and they were like, oh,
Mm.
but this is my tool and I'm not going to share even the source code, not even with my neighbor. And from that to the point where it is like, just dump it on
Yeah.
GitHub and
Yeah.
let anyone use it. If they find it useful, good for them. And if we're not innovative enough, then someone else should take over the job. We will do something we should think deeper before we do something. And that's really, I think, been a real revelation for me over the last 10 years. I mean, I've had really smart students come with me, and this question of reusability of code, and what's the
Mm.
point if we write a function and only we use it? What's the point? I mean, at the end of the day, the question that I don't know if it is true in physics, but in biology, that people write these really slightly scary articles called the reproducibility crisis of
That's it.
reproducibility, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, I mean, I recall my philosophy. Actually, this guy who taught us, professor who taught us systems biology, was a guest faculty. He would make this argument that the thing that distinguishes science from religion or cultural conventions is reproducibility.
Yes. Yes.
And if it's
Absolutely.
not reproducible, it's not scientific. I mean,
Mm.
done. And I think this, like I said, it's strange how past things keep coming back to me. So I can only say I had good mentors and teachers. I mean, that's really, I think, the real the real lesson for me. And I hope I try to pass that on to my students. But
Wonderful,
we don't
wonderful.
know what happens in the future, because telling the
No, no,
future
no.
is a
This
bit
is
of
this
a
is such an
mystery.
important point, Chaitanya. What you mentioned. I want to actually, pick on few of the points what we just actually heard from you. One is, this uniqueness of bringing mathematics and biology together. This is a very fascinating area, and you also are, trained in a laboratory. That's something which is a very unique combination, I believe, because see, a lot of people who also do biophysics tend to also gravitate either from a computational biology perspective, or they may come from, let's say, biochemistry viewpoint, where they inculcate and incorporate some physical techniques into their methodologies. But in your case, you have been able to amalgamate quantitative, coding and other kind of things with the experimental observations. In fact, I would urge listeners and viewers to have a look at Chaitanya's webpage. It's a fascinating, they're almost like a cabinet of biological
Thank you.
curiosities. No, no, it's one of the beautiful websites on I've seen in terms of the way it actually incorporates research, not just only the research problem you're looking at from a laboratory perspective. It also actually gives you the kind of the variety of thinking which goes into such kind of pursuit, and that I think is a very fascinating thing. So my question is, at least to give the first layer of the question, is that openness also is incorporated into this point of view you just mentioned about codes which can be made public, etc. So give us a gist of how did you come to combine these things together, because this is a very important part of your philosophy, either explicit or implicit in your work, and it is something which a lot of people would be interested in knowing how this combination came into picture. I'm explicitly mentioning the experimental biology with quantitativeness which you can bring in from, let's say, coding, and also quantitative imaging. That's another beautiful aspect in your
Yes.
lab. So
Yes.
can you just give us a gist of this combination? How did this thinking come into picture? Because there are very few people who would be able to do it. They may want to do it, but to do it in a consistent way is a different thing.
Yeah. I think this is a good question, and I'm not sure I have a coherent answer for it,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll try. Um, so when I was studying in way back in my high school around the 10th standard, we had a bunch of physicians from the Army Medical
Mm-hmm.
College, AFMC, come over. And ironically, for medical doctors who, I mean, I have some close friends who practice medicine, I have the general impression that numerics and number based thinking is not a common practice. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not, I mean, this is my impression. I could be
Mm-hmm.
mistaken. But those three guys, those young officers, told me, do what you want in life, but for your, in the Indian context, 11th and 12th, do not drop mathematics, because those concepts that you learn at that level will make or break what you understand of sophisticated mathematics later. I mean, basically integration, differentiation, and trigonometry.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, in the Indian context, it's a little weird that it all gets packed into just these 2 years, and those who don't get it at all. And we see this when we interview PhD students now. Um, and so I think that firstly helped me get over my math phobia, because as a biologist, I sat in a department where most people had an, if not an aversion, then an actual fear of numerical values and dealing with numbers. But then there's the second part, I think, which is what you very nicely pointed out about thinking quantitatively. And I think this was brought to us by this guest faculty, Anupam Saraf.
Mm-hmm.
He's an interesting character in himself. If you ever have the chance, I think you should talk to him. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he again, like, he started his masters in zoology, wandered off to TIFR project because he knew how to program those card-based computers which
Mm-hmm.
were
Mm-hmm.
around in the 70s and early 80s. Um, that project got sort of collapsed a bit, and he then looked around, went off to the Netherlands, and worked on ecosystem dynamics modeling, and then from that he wandered into um, management consulting, and
Mm-hmm.
came back to India and taught us a course which at that time was bizarre. It was called systems biology. Yeah, and I mean, think about this 1996, 98 in the Indian context. I mean, I went around looking for labs that do systems biology, and people gave me really strange looks at that point. Like, are you okay? And what have you been
Yeah.
drinking? So, and there were a couple of so this instructor was very I think so. This is something that has taught me also about teaching now that I deal with it, and I know it's a very different context in the IISER system, but that he would always give us a reading list at the end of the course. And this
Mm,
reading list was not a compulsory reading list. It was like,
mm.
if you want to dig deeper,
Explore.
here's the list exactly. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, very
explore.
nice. Very nice.
And that had a bunch of books on cybernetics and system theory, which are sort of coming from the 70s, where this idea of modeling social dynamics and biological dynamics using newly found methods in dynamical systems. I mean, talking about nonlinear oscillators and initial value problems, which
Mm,
which even climatologists today struggle with, um, and these mapped to biology. So this was a mind blowing fact for me, which actually started getting me interested in something where I could apply it. And during my summer break, I think I tried my hand at epidemiological modeling
oh, nice, nice. Mm,
of dengue outbreaks, because they have oscillatory characteristics,
mm,
and it's very obvious that there are this transmission from one organism to another, and there's some what we may call parasitological properties.
mm,
And at that point, what I now know, those models were SIR, and during COVID we all learned about them: susceptible, infected, recovered. These are
mm,
very simple, what we may call compartment models. And this thought process, I mean, I made no progress, unfortunately. I must say I failed quite badly, in the sense that I think we wrote down some equations, we solved something, we were not very careful about our integration methods and so on. We got some answers, but then the question was like, what does it even mean? Do we have
mm,
data to compare it to? And that's when it struck me that without a real world comparison, you can show a lot with models. And this is something that in a biological context, in a conference, even in the department, often you hear this, that you can show anything with theoretical models. And this
mm,
is where then the constraining of those models with experimental data becomes extremely important. And this is a
mm,
lesson I learned over time. I mean,
mm,
it
mm,
it it took my entire PhD, where we were trying to make measurements where they were frustrating. We barely could manage to make reasonable, reliable measurements, and then still not make sense of the problem. We were looking at intracellular transport in cells, um, trying to control lasers using a microscope whose APIs for laser control were not open source, so we couldn't
mm.
touch them. So it was like playing with one hand tied behind your back
Right, right.
almost. But it was challenging, but very very educative. And the kind of observations we made then, which did not make sense to us. Essentially, membraneless compartments were seen in the structures that we were observing. Today, I mean, maybe for the last 7 8 years in biology, are the most exciting sort of paradigm called liquid phase separation. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
except that we didn't have the words then to
yeah,
even
yeah.
say this. And this is, I mean, it amazes me that within my own active career span, I have already seen this shift from confusion to fashion. I mean,
Mm.
it's unbelievable.
It's
It's very
amazing.
exciting. Yeah.
It's absolutely. In fact, that's one of the topics which is under exploration, right? In biophysics
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
liquid phase separation, soft matter viewpoint also has kind of
Yeah.
brought in new perspective into this. So this is a fascinating thing to know about it. The other part I would want to, kind of ask you a little bit more is your love for books.
Sure.
That is something which I would want to pick your brain a little bit more on, because I and you have been actually talking about, to really also, somehow get this kind of slightly bigger agenda of, making books more central to a lot of things what we do in terms of both writing, and also putting it across to the public, and in some way also bringing in people to reading and other things. So I also know that you are a very active proponent of encouraging people to go and explore books and book in Pune. There's a lot of interesting things which happen, and Chaitanya does share with us a lot of information related to that. And this is a wonderful culture. That's one of the important aspects which I also found in Pune, to actually have that inclination of exploring from an intellectual viewpoint. Could you give us a background of this from a Pune perspective, having been a resident for such a long duration? Second is also your own inclination and love for books. I would like to actually listen more about that.
Yeah. So I think I mean there are probably two primary sources that inculcated this love for books in me. I mean, one is my home upbringing,
Mm,
my
mm,
family, and basically my parents
mm,
and grandmother, and my school and college. And I know I feel embarrassed. I mean, at age 50, I should. I mean, I don't think you can always ever escape your parents, perhaps, but I mean, they are your parents. But no, I think there were two, three things that whenever, as a child, I had questions. If I asked them, I don't know, why is the sky blue? Why is the river flowing like this?
mm,
What is the nearest town to this? Their only answer, they did not answer my questions. Basically,
mm,
their answer was, go look it up,
mm,
go find it yourself. And of course, we were not very, we didn't have a fantastic book collection. We had a small encyclopedia, and then there was the library,
mm,
and that was perhaps the most powerful thing that they could have said, because I think um, the fact that you may not know the answer, but that you, by trying to look for it, you
mm.
may or may not find it, but you will discover a lot of things in the
A lot of
process.
things. Yes, absolutely.
And I actually have been reading about a person who is, I think, a faculty somewhere in the UK, called Adam Kucharski. He writes on
Hmm.
epidemiological modeling. He's an applied mathematician. And he calls it, I think, the value of slow. And
Mm,
this
mm,
idea that slowing things down, and this was in the context, he's written a book called Viral, by the way,
mm.
where he maps this idea of memes and concepts going, in today's language, viral, in the sense that they become widespread and have
Mhm,
take on their own life, and then contrast that with actual physiological infections through viruses
mm,
that
mm,
are physical entities. And he was, of course, trying to find common themes, meaning at a dynamical systems level, what is common and what is different. Because having a physical existence means a virus can't go from the computer, for example, to anyone
mm, mm,
else. Not a physical virus, the virtual one, of course, it can. And this idea of slow, he was talking in the context of social media, and how, if you want a more reasoned discussion, you need to give time to people to think,
think.
and so-called long format text, as
Mm.
opposed to 76 I forgot the Twitter limit now, I to X limit. But
Yeah, 250 or something. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
so
Yeah.
and I think, and one thing that often happened is, when we would go on these long train journeys, because we lived somewhere far away, we were
Mm,
not in Pune for a very long time. um, 2 night journeys by
mm,
train. The only thing we were allowed to catch, we didn't have video games, so we had
mm.
books, and we could look outside, get bored, or read a book. I mean,
Book.
this was
Yeah.
the only option, not bother the parents. And this was, um, I think this brings back my thought that, in a way, one, you can get bored, and there's no penalty to it. I mean, you just deal with yourself and your thoughts. And the second is that books provide you what can I say, deep time
Mm,
engagement with some topic. It may be fiction. It doesn't have to be anything objective or real, even. And the second, the enabler, to go back to the
mm,
question of my association with books, was the libraries. I was really, really fortunate, I think, to have extremely well-stocked libraries and generous librarians. I mean,
mm,
it I think I remember my high school librarian letting me into the inner sanctum sanctorum of the rare books which are not for issue, only to borrow and read there. This was in a local school called St. Vincent's, which is something like 150 years old now. It was the
Wow.
old stone buildings, and I mean, it was an authoritarian school in every other respect. So you could easily get beaten for doing, being slightly uh, off the out of the rails of the rules at that point. But there was those rules, but then there was this freedom, and this was really really nice. And I think the same thing with all these army station libraries was really helpful. And it continued to my college, Ferguson College, which had this
Mm.
Bhai Jerabai Wadia library. I used to take pride in actually going and issuing books that were last issued in 1968 or 1970s, because they just haven't been read. I mean, it felt like, why is this poor book sitting here unissued? So I don't know. I think some people say that books are the last resort of introverts. Maybe I don't know. I mean, but it gives peace. It gives a sense of contemplative uh, maybe engagement with ideas. You may not agree. I mean, I've read books that I just am horrified that I read them, but I read them anyway. I mean, uh, I've read books that I think, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this on the internet, but essentially I've read Mein Kampf and got bored like hell. So I know that it is a very badly written book and has very strewn, bizarre concepts that make no logical sense. So it's surprising that it was so successful at
Yeah.
one point in political history. I've read biographies of, I don't know, all kinds of politicians, and of course
Mm.
these funny scientific um, popular science books, which started getting me more and more excited about this. And in fact, there was a very strange moment when my larger family from my mother's side, they met in a town called Jabalpur,
Mm.
which is in Madhya Pradesh, and this, I guess, three and a half, 4 generations ago person had moved from the coast to Jabalpur, worked as a tutor to wealthy people,
Mhm.
and was so excited about modern science, and felt that it needed to be brought to the wider public, not necessarily English reading, that he wrote a book called Gyan Sagar in Hindi. He was Marathi speaker, but somehow he thought Hindi was the more it was the language that would reach more people. And it's amazing. He has drawn spectra of molecules. He has
Mhm.
drawn the planetary systems that were known at that time. He has even attempted to draw evolutionary trees in terms of biology, the biomolecules that were thought in 1910, 1920 to be responsible for life. It's unbelievable. And all this in a 200 page slim volume. I
Nice.
mean, and this is, I mean, for me, books have a very weird way of talking through the time to you. I
Mm.
mean,
Mm.
it's almost like, that person is not there anymore, obviously. So, but reading them, you get a kind of connect with something you would never have got otherwise. And I know video
Absolutely.
is meant to have the same effect, but for me, I think books give you more time to perhaps, because they're slower,
Mm. Mm.
to build your own thought process about
Thoughts.
it. And you can always go back, right? I mean, you can of course go back and forth in a recorded video, but I find, in a way, I mean, this is obvious to, I mean, particularly you who deal with both
Yeah.
written and video and audio, all of them, in fact, that each format provides its own constraints, and
Constraints.
somehow there's some I don't know, something relaxing and exciting about books that for me exceeds most other experiences. Having said that, I love cycling. I love going on
Yeah. Yeah.
walks. But when given a book and some time and peace and quiet, it's really it's really a pleasure and maybe a privilege.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
indeed a privilege.
In fact, it's such an important point what you mentioned because, uh, in my opinion, again, I feel that there is no substitute for a reading. Even though audio and video actually bring in a very important,
Yeah,
dimension to the
yeah,
thought. Partly because, for every book or every piece of writing one reads, the kind of imagination which actually goes into a person's mind is very individualistic.
Yes, yes,
Okay, whereas let's say if you look at voice or imagery based approach,
yeah,
including video,
yeah,
uh, so there is a short change of that process.
yes.
So what happens is you will then be invited into somebody else's imagination,
I agree.
uh,
This is
and
really nice way to put it.
yeah, and
Mm.
it probably is very effective. That's probably one of the reason why visual media is so powerful, because
Yeah,
it's easy to capture somebody's imagination or somebody's kind of thought process in and invite them into your own
yeah,
imagination. But while reading, you will have to actually create images in your own mind.
yeah.
And invariably, it happens so that no two people would actually create the same image.
Absolutely. And
Even
that,
if
I mean,
you,
that's very powerful,
yeah,
right?
it's that's very powerful. And the second point is like even if you are really studying mathematics, which actually is supposed to have the most concrete of structures in terms of how you really look at it, where the people or mathematicians really, process this information. No two mathematicians probably actually would process the information in a similar way. Although the
That is
equations might,
amazing, right?
that's
That is
amazing,
amazing
right?
because we
Yeah.
claim that maths is objective, Kian. I
Yes.
mean,
Yes.
true reality. I
Yeah.
don't know.
True.
I mean, are we allowed to use these words? I mean, so,
So this is always a fascinating thing. So that's primarily the reason why also I still hold writing and reading as the most
yeah,
important part of whatever I do. It's a downstream. The
yeah,
video and audio can be the downstream of
yeah,
writing and thing. The
yeah.
conversation is another thing. It's something which you,
Mm,
you cannot substitute by just only mere reading or
yeah,
writing. And
yeah.
that probably is one of the great things about conversations like what we are having.
No, no, I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, yeah.
I, 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 I think I'm reminded of. I used to also. I had a. I think this sounds very anachronistic, but I had a hobby at one point, 1984 onwards, and
Hmm.
that was listening to shortwave radio. I don't know
Ah,
if this
nice,
makes sense.
nice. Yeah, yeah.
And I remember, I mean, this was 1984. India was in crisis. News was not really filtering out. I don't know if this was November 1984
Oh, okay.
when the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had just been assassinated.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We were restricted at home. Things were shut down, and it suddenly felt like from far away you can now hear a voice. So that's why podcasts for me are almost like a modern day analog of radio, but
Yeah,
perhaps
exactly.
customized, decentralized, and much more vast, perhaps.
Vast. Yeah.
Um, and that continued for a long time till I mean because I have sort of I think because of the family and people around
Mm.
me and the interest in world affairs, I remember tuning into Radio Iraq
No.
at the time that the United States was about to invade them, and
Hmm.
they were making these very last bombastic statements, and unfortunately they really didn't last very long, and it's very strange. I don't know. I mean these. I understand this doesn't happen anymore, right?
Mm.
Or largely
Exactly.
not. I don't know anyone who does it, for
Yeah.
example. So
Yeah, in
maybe
fact,
I don't
that's an
know.
untapped thing to a large extent. If you look at it, podcast, of course, brings in a productive element to news and also conversations. But the radio has a broadcasting element, which actually
Yeah,
somehow,
yeah,
because private news is still not allowed, I think so. If I'm correct, in India, you would not be able to air private news, or
yeah,
private channels cannot air news.
yeah.
They can only do either advertisement or which is
Entertainment. Yeah,
entertainment, and
yeah.
it is always the only the advertisement which is there. If you listen to radio
Yes,
nowadays,
yes.
it's
I
not a
do it
very
while
pleasant.
driving. I
Yeah,
listen
yeah.
while driving sometimes. Although I'm reminded of this argument that I mean, I think for our modern day, the context is Bill Gates.
Mm.
Allegedly, Bill Gates did not have a radio in his car. He apparently ripped it out because he didn't want it to think. But for the biology context, there's a very famous example of this Carey Mullis, the guy
No, Kerry
who
Mullis, yes, yeah.
invented
The
the polymerase
the
chain
PCR,
reaction.
PCR, yeah,
Yes,
PCR,
absolutely.
yeah. Mm.
And apparently, uh, I mean, to go back to this radio business, he was trying to solve this problem of the company he worked in. I forgot the name. They were making oligonucleotides, and
Mm.
they were able to sequence DNA short stretches of it, but they had this problem of concentration of the DNA.
Mm.
And he was thinking about using some tricks to amplify it. And apparently, while driving, he started doing calculations in his head about the fold amplification if you did a kind of cyclical reaction,
Mm.
just kept mixing the same thing again and again with sufficient number of so-called priming probes, or primers as we call them now. And and he apparently stopped his car, got out, took out a piece of paper, did the arithmetic, said, realized that in, it's a 2 to the power n in terms
Mm.
of cycles. So 10 cycles would already give him 2 to the power 10 copies, starting with one copy. I mean, and so, I mean, I like radio, but I also realize silence is even more interesting and important. So, so when one really needs to think hard, I think it's best to shut off all sound. Actually, it's amazing. Late nights, writing papers is very good early
Yeah,
mornings or late nights
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
you're right.
truly silent. Of course, noise cancelling headphones can help,
Yeah,
but
yeah. No,
yeah,
I find uh, lyric-less music to be
yes,
much more effective for me rather
than
than
silence
silence.
entirely.
Yeah, this is my personal
Interesting.
experience.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
fact, I can't write or read with lyrics playing in the
yeah,
background.
yeah,
That
yeah.
means that's probably sensory
So
kind of a.
this is
Yeah.
interesting because this
Yeah.
reminds me. I worked in an experimental lab for a few years full time. I mean, I was basically doing some bench work biochemistry, as we call
Mm.
it, and there was perpetually a fight between two wings of the lab.
Mm.
That wing that felt a radio should be on at all times, and the other wing that felt that
No.
shut the noise out and no noise, no distractions, especially not acoustic ones. And
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
funny because I think different people obviously have different ways of
yeah.
focusing and mental processing, and I think maybe my this is my impression that when the work is perhaps routine, it's good to have
Mm.
this kind of
Yeah,
white noise like
yeah,
thing in
yeah.
the
You're
background.
right. You're right.
But if it is not routine or you're doing something every time different, then maybe you do need the a more
Absolutely.
meditative silence. I don't know. I
True,
mean,
true. In fact, yeah, I agree with you. Even when I am
yeah,
generating new text, for example, if you're interpreting something, it's very good to have something which is
yeah,
totally silent kind of
yeah,
an
yeah.
environment. Great, very nice. So, another point I would want to emphasize a little bit more is your exposure to different cultures. That is something which I am also very fascinated because you also have very deep inclination and understanding and acquaintance in German language, and you have spent a long duration in Europe as part of your education and research. Uh, and you also have a very deep connection to Maharashtra, Marathi culture, including the fact that you have written books in Marathi, which actually is something I would want to also know a little bit more about. And this element is something very fascinating to me because I have not only seen you, Punekar, but also many people of that kind who have this strong inclination of the international perspective, also being rooted in their own kind of place. Where does that come from, and how did you kind of develop it, or was it organically it emerged out of your thought process? How do you
I
explain
mean,
that?
it's a lovely question, and I think I can only say again that I think the my if I may say my gravitation towards
Mm,
Germany and German culture was
mm,
purely accidental in the sense that I had Pune has a very peculiar had at that time, at least
mm,
in
mm.
the 90s until the 90s, a very peculiar connection with Germany
Yes.
because of I think historical reasons.
Yeah.
But be that as may, I'm not fully aware of them. Some of
Mm,
them I have some ideas, but the high schools had German as a foreign language and
mm.
no other
No, even
language.
even now, a lot of schools actually have
Yeah,
that
yeah,
French
and
and German. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And our school had a couple of natives who had left Switzerland, the German-speaking part of
Mm,
Switzerland, and settled in Pune and were teaching the language along with teaching other subjects in high school. The library had books in the language, and
mm,
so I sort of started dabbling in it. And there was a during my bachelor's, I took a couple of courses in the Max Miller Bhavan, the Goethe Institute, as
mm,
it's
mm,
called. Um, and that really got me hooked because they had an extensive library of literature and like German plays and classic works by Goethe and Brecht and so on. Brecht is not classic, more modern perhaps. Um, and I had this impression that there was this unusual culture, sometimes very different from Indian culture, and then yet
Mm,
this whole so-called Indo-German overlap
mm,
with shared words. So it's unfamiliar enough to be fascinating but understandable, and I think that led me to sort of get deeper and deeper into the language. In fact, at some point, I was in a teacher training course, which essentially would have set me on a trajectory to become a German language teacher. Uh,
wow. Okay.
I made a little bit of pocket money as a private tutor also for a bit in my master's.
Mm.
And at that point, I had to think, I mean, do I like my science more or do I like the language more? And I think I chose to go with the science because it seemed, to be honest, at that time, it seemed like a practical choice to make. Um, uh, Now, later in retrospect, I think it was also an intellectually better choice to make, but
Mm,
not because I don't like the language, but because I think it seems to work better with my own mental
mm,
makeup, perhaps.
mm, mm,
And Germany was a very enlightening experience in the sense that um, you know this idea. So there's a German phrase that a lot of my German colleagues reminded me of initially, which is consequent,
mm.
meaning you do what you say.
See, yeah, yeah.
You don't, when once you start something, you don't stop till you finish it. And I know this is sometimes a cliche. It sounds like something that
Including in Bollywood movies.
yeah, 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 yeah. Uh, and the other thing is, I think this idea that what you say is what you get, and
Mm,
this
mm,
is this oddly enough is also supposed to be a Pune characteristic. People are very upfront, sometimes to
mm,
the point of sounding very rude.
mm.
uh, they think they're being honest. I mean, and this is also something that is true all over Germany, not just in one city.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think there, I think that taught me a lot because um, it makes life simpler. I mean, you're not messing around. You just get to the point and move on. You build friendships, but those are true friendships then,
Mm,
and work becomes definitely much more straightforward and streamlined. You people say upfront on your face what they think of your work, good, bad, ugly, whichever it is,
mm, mm,
and I think I really was I I felt a kind of, what can I say, acceptance in a foreign country where I look different from everyone. Despite what many of my friends who went off to the United States thinking that Germany is seems, at least from the outside,
mm,
monocultural.
mm,
Say, for example, in contrast to the United States or the United Kingdom, even, which has this whole colonial
mm, mm,
baggage also, where people have come from all the colonies to their country. And I think this was useful because I think dealing with Germany in German, on terms that I felt like I was treated as a student. It didn't matter where I came from.
mm,
I think that was very, very liberating as a young person, and that has continued to stay with me now. I think I this idea that you should say what you think, which may not always be a wise choice at times, but I think I think it keeps things honest.
mm,
And I tell some of my students that I don't mean it ill. I just simply mean to get on with things, to get to the point so that we're not beating around the bush for
mm,
too long. And I think that's also then a part of the academic training,
mm, mm,
that that you stick to the point. So in German, there's another phrase, a football phrase actually, Ball flach halten. So
mm,
when you kick the ball, it can balloon, right? And you want to keep the ball flat because you want it to go exactly where you're trying to get it, not here and there, not play tricks. Just be to the point, um, be straightforward. And this is I guess this is considered one of those almost cliched German traits. And obviously, I'm not German, but I have imbibed some of those at
some
least,
of
I think.
yeah.
And I think I have, I guess each of us individually goes through some trajectories. And for me, it's important, when you travel somewhere, I mean, of course, we see beautiful things or not, or we like things we don't. And I think it's like maybe you carry these cultural influences with you as you go
Mm,
along,
mm,
and they make you a unique person. I mean, and I think that's an interesting thing because no two people are anyway alike.
mm,
And I think it also reminds you that as academics, particularly where science is universal, and we can travel to other places and still be understood, because we speak, even if we may not speak it in the same language, we
mm,
speak the same conceptual language. That this is really a powerful thing for us. I mean, I also spent a year and a half or so, about 2 years in the States and
mm.
on the East Coast, and that culture was very different.
Very, very, yeah, yeah.
I mean, also very academically competitive,
Mm,
but different in a way that it took me some time to get used to it. And um, apparently, I also started speaking much faster. So my
mm. Okay.
family tells me. So, yeah, I think the thing I really Boston, which is a spectacular
Mm,
city, especially for academics, the thing that I really loved was the fact that there was a sea nearby, there was a river, there
mm,
were
mm,
every pub you go to, there are university people everywhere, and it does have a sort of sense like a I mean, like a very big university town, which is
mm.
also a real city. I mean, on the coast with the shipping industry and other technical industry around. So no, I think I have gained a lot from all my travels, and I think I mean I keep thinking about this. How do you travel without losing yourself,
Mm, mm.
um, and yet gaining what may be something constructive out of your experiences? And I don't think any one of us can control this,
Control, yeah, yeah.
but I have been just very fortunate maybe, and met some very very nice people who really introduced me to their cultures in a
Mm.
way that I probably would not otherwise have gained as much from all this traveling. So
Wonderful. See, such an important element what you're mentioning because in a way, scientific thinking is that way, right? It actually takes good ideas and progresses forward, and it also is very good at rejecting ideas which might not be, which prove where there's an evidence that it doesn't work.
yeah,
And in that way, all good ideas are up for grabs. So if you go
exactly.
to any culture and if you find something which is really good about a particular culture, in fact, that's the whole part of being human. This is my
Yes.
definition,
Yes.
right? Because you should probably take that particular offering and enrich one's life with that particular offer, and it only can add to what is there, right? It
Yeah.
cannot subtract from
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
is there,
I
and in
think
that
there's
way,
a
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
I agree, and I think there's this beautiful phrase that I think as a young person, I was maybe a little worried about ideas and getting credit, not
Mm,
getting
mm.
credit, and I think one evolves eventually. One hopes out of these fears, and this phrase that knowledge is like a candle, that
Mm.
if you share the candle and light another one, it doesn't diminish the
Yeah,
brightness of the
yeah,
first
yeah.
one. And I think this is I think this is true of both culture and knowledge,
Knowledge, yeah.
and what we share with each other, because like you said earlier, it starts with conversations, it
Mm,
goes to more concrete things, maybe written words,
mm, mm,
actions, behavior, working, and I think this is. I mean, one could argue every activity is a social activity, and
mm.
I mean, otherwise, in isolation, we are not very useful. I mean, as humans, as uh, whether we're scientists or something else. I mean, so yeah. I mean, this idea of this brilliant scientist alone in the
Yeah.
lab. I mean, this is a myth. I mean, I
Myth,
think yeah.
absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
maybe a romantic myth, maybe
Yeah,
great
yeah.
for storytelling, or in the words of Newton, no, I mean, like he couldn't have seen as far
So,
without standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, yeah, I think oft repeated, but I think
yeah.
sometimes forgotten what it actually means.
Means, yeah.
So,
No, in fact, it's very interesting because there is also very, very kind of fascinating joke associated with it because he was making fun of Robert Hooke,
oh yes,
and
yes.
Robert Hooke was a small person,
Oh
and
no.
Newton is mentioning that he's standing on Jane's in the sense in the bigger way, and there's
Yes,
also another joke. This is all joke, by the
yes,
way. I
yes,
don't have
yes,
evidence
yes.
for
Yeah,
that. There's
yeah.
another fascinating joke is that I was not able to become a big scientist because the Janes were standing on me or something like
Oh
that.
no. Yeah, I think. these kind of quotations are dodgy in the least, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
but I think, I mean, I know you're also excited about science, history of
Yeah,
science, and
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
lately I've been trying to dig into some funny stuff, which in some bizarre way connects me to from my studies and
Mm-hmm.
from the concepts I work on to really the foundations
Yeah,
of
yeah.
early biology, and it's fascinating. I mean, this idea of this Erdős distance. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
this graph theoretical idea of
Mm.
how far you are from any other. I think, what is it, 6 degrees of separation?
Mm, mm, mm,
Seven, I've forgotten. But in academia, I think the networks are even closer, perhaps.
mm.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you then go
Yes,
formally
yes.
by the authorship, of course, you will get a proper data set to work with. I mean, for example, the it only I only realized sitting in a book release some
Mm.
years ago in Pune, where the audience had a person who was related to this anthropologist from Pune called Iravati Karve,
Karve.
who
Yeah,
also
yeah.
studied in Germany, by the way,
Mm, mm,
at a
mm.
very strange juncture in Germany's history in the
Yeah, yeah.
early 1930s. She was Eugen Fischer's PhD student,
Instrument. Yeah.
who is probably, unfortunately, a notorious character in the
Mm,
history of science for propagating ideas of phrenology
mm, mm.
and perhaps giving even a pseudoscientific basis for
Basically,
racial
yeah.
theories of supremacy of one set of over people of over other. But her colleague at a later stage was a biologist who trained under Carl von Frisch, the
Mm-hmm.
discoverer of bee behavior. He
Mm-hmm.
won a Nobel Prize for ethology, so behavioral ecology, and finding its biochemical basis. And she was a person of Jewish extraction who had to leave Germany, and Iravati Karve brought her here, and she
Wow.
apparently headed the zoology department of Pune University, where I
Fantastic.
studied. And I only found this out recently, and I keep thinking, these are things to be celebrated. I mean, these
Absolutely.
are
This is fascinating, Chaitanya. I did not
yeah,
know this
yeah,
at all.
yeah.
This is very interesting.
And I've
Wow.
been
You
digging
should.
since then. So
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I, I actually tried to ask some science historians to work on it,
Mm.
but they told me you do it yourself. When I have the time from whatever else I'm supposed to be doing, I hope to actually put some of this together, because it's going back to what we were talking about earlier, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
cross connections,
Mm.
the while there is a cultural distinction between regions, the universality of science in a way, and how this cross pollination is so important for each of us,
Mm-hmm.
because seeing things from a slightly different perspective really enriches our lives. I mean, and I think this is one of the, I mean, key lessons to me, at least, from
Absolutely. In fact, I
yes,
can't agree more because,
yeah,
science is too important an human endeavor to be left to only historians and philosophers to think
yeah,
about science.
yeah,
Because I think there's a big role of scientists to play in history and philosophy of science.
yeah.
In fact, there is that's something I'm seeing that a lot of people do actually have this interest. And please tell me about the books. The books, what you've been actually writing, and this is
So
in yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. So I am sorry. Yes, I you had
yeah,
asked me that earlier. I'm
yeah,
sorry we digressed a bit,
yeah.
but so it started off as a sort of exercise for Science Day, which is to, I
Mm-hmm.
think, celebrate C.V. Raman's Nobel Prize
Yeah.
declaration, and
I know it's yeah, it's the observation of Raman effect, isn't it?
observation
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the Raman effect, in
Raman
fact,
effect. Yeah,
which then eventually led to his
yeah, yeah. You're right. You're right.
prize. But we had been thinking about some very simple problems of mechanics at a cellular scale, or what some people call cellular biomechanics, and I have a tendency, I mean, as a modeler, to think of this in a very simple paradigm. And the paradigm I've been thinking about for a while is balloons, and we were thinking about this and talking, and so we decided to. I mean, I was doodling basically. At some
Mm.
point, I had some time to sketch things out, and I got very lucky because I have a very talented PhD student who is an artist also in her own right. She, I think, has
Nice,
a
nice.
portfolio of some kinds than we, and she has a friend in turn who went to the Royal School of Arts in London, and together we put together this zine, which I have a copy here,
Oh,
which
wonderful.
is called
Physics.
it's not very easy to read, but it's
Uh,
Bacterial Physics,
Nice. Beautiful.
Bacteria versus antibiotics. And ironically, this has in its basis a reasonably serious result that we found, which showed, and we could estimate and quantify mechanical properties of cells that are bacteria that are treated with the conventional antibiotics, ampicillin-based penicillin, essentially going back to Alexander Fleming
Yeah.
and his discoveries. Uh, and this we have been trying to put into multiple languages right now. So I should probably have corrected you a bit, but I haven't actually written a book in Marathi yet. So this is the ambition, this is the goal eventually. But we're not there yet. And what I have been doing is, with the help of this artist, we got a little bit of money from the India Science Fest, which is also happening on campus.
Yes, very soon, within a few days.
9 days, 8 days, I guess the clock is ticking on us. But we hope to release a Marathi and a Hindi version.
Oh, and wonderful.
If there are people happy to translate, I'm sorry, pro bono, meaning without payment, then we're very happy to have them. Because the trick, as we all know, is, I mean, I have studied biology and whatever little biophysics in the English language. Converting that into any other language is challenging as such. And I have gone back and forth. I've asked relatives, I've asked my former college professors to help me out. And I think it's been an experience in its own way. And we're trying to expand that. I have a little comic which is still in the works on viruses, which started as with many good things during Corona pandemic, during the lockdown period, when I had really time to think a little bit about this context, this idea of how to communicate our science better. I have these strange conversations with my hairdresser, my barber, and he tells me about the fact that he likes books but doesn't have the time to read them, and that he doesn't have a library to access them, but so he reads on his phone. And so, I mean, I think we as public scientists, and I personally take this as a personal responsibility, I think have a mission perhaps to try to convey what we do in a way that is relevant to the public that essentially finances these lovely institutions that we work in. And I think that so one of the things I do every year when my master's students who write their theses, or even PhD students, is ask them to write a popular summary of their thesis in their own language, in their mother tongue. Not everyone does it, because it's, as you can imagine, not an easy task. And I also can't evaluate that. I mean, it's in Bengali, Gujarati, Tamil. I can't read those languages, unfortunately. But I think it's important, and I've told them that they should try to submit it to local newspapers and in wherever that language is spoken, so that at least the fact that science is more than just what is written in the textbook, that comes through, that it's a process of discovery. And there are, I mean, the reason why we train, and I mean, we're now talking among scientists, but we know that the reason why we train is to come to that point where we find what is not yet found.
Exactly.
And to convey this excitement, I think, is important, because and so while this is not something we're asked to do, I think it's something that we probably should try to do whenever it's possible.
No, in the long run, I think this probably would be the most important thing we'll also do. Because as even Feynman kind of mentioned, although he ended up doing something spectacular in his own field, but he was very clear that in the long run, what is probably the most impactful thing. Even today, we discuss Feynman because of his lectures, right? Which were given to undergraduates. Of course, he did some outstanding work in QED and other things.
You're right. Actually, that's a funny point. It's also coming back to this point that we've talked about it, and I think despite the horrors and the sadness of Corona and the dangers that lurked in it for many of us, I think it was for those who could stay safe, those who could stay in protected places like us, and I definitely could count myself in it. It was an opportunity to reflect on exactly this point. How can we as scientists have a true impact on society? So along with this comic business, I also started, like you probably, and like most of us, teaching online. And I have been indeed working on lecture notes for that course. And
Fabulous.
I hope maybe if we talk next time, I might actually have a manuscript ready.
Yes,
It's
yes,
one of
yes.
those it's a mountain of work, and I now I don't know how people write textbooks at all. I don't know how to finish this anymore.
Yeah,
But
amazing.
I hope I will get to it at the end. And I think what has really helped me is this exactly what you said, it's something that maybe, and we don't know anything
Mm.
about the actual impact, but it may have an impact, may help a few people out there. We don't know that, right, in advance. I mean,
You know,
ours is only to do. I mean, and see
absolutely,
what happens. Put it out there.
absolutely. This is such a important point what you mentioned because that's probably the most satisfying thing also being able to do this because in all kind of viewpoints, a scientist in India in institutions like IISER and other places are all said and done kind of in a privileged kind of
Yes,
a
absolutely.
part of the society. And there is also a goodwill. In fact, going by nature's survey, Indians do have a very high opinion and trust in science and scientific
Yeah.
pursuit. Although how much science is part of our culture, that is a questionable
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
something which I still feel that it should actually increase. But
Yeah.
all said and done, there is still a goodwill. For example, the
Mhm.
kind of acceptance of vaccination and
Yes.
overall public health, at least, or for that matter, if you take all things which have happened in the past, even for that matter, the support what ISRO gets, it's all thanks
Yes.
to taxpayers' money, right? That's
Yes.
the whole point.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In that way, there's a reasonable case for that, and I'm hoping that it probably only goes forward and higher in all
I
senses.
agree with you, and I think I mean, I have colleagues in Japan who I chat with once in a while, and
Mm,
and one of them told me something like, India is now the most populous country in the world.
mm,
So how we proceed in future will
mm.
affect the world. I mean, in the sense,
Absolutely.
and I think we owe not just our own population, but in a way the globe,
Yeah.
responsible society, and as educators, as scientists, with this sort of position of peace and calm,
Mm,
when many
mm.
people don't necessarily have that, maybe the majority. I think we do really owe it, and I think it's a strange, very, very huge burden to be
Burden
carrying,
to yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
but at least if we can deal with some of it,
Some of
I
it,
think we will have
exactly.
done our job
Done
properly.
about
And I think, and of course, the force multiplier are the students, so hopefully they will also see the value of this, and some of them maybe return to these sort of professions. And I think I agree with you. This is the real reward of what we
Mm,
do. And I think, and I
absolutely.
mean, it's funny because we obsess about very, very, very small details
Mm.
in our own field. But ironically, perhaps the thing that will have the biggest impact is something else. I mean,
Yes, yeah,
so
yeah. No,
uh,
it's a beautiful thing also in a way. It also gives us a unique kind of what should I say, a unique positions where you not only can go in depth at
yeah,
certain point of your work,
yeah,
and also probably broaden the scope of the work
yeah,
by interacting with the public and
yes, yes, yes.
yeah. This has been a wonderful, conversation, Chaitanya. In fact, this is not going to be the only conversation. In fact, I would surely have Chaitanya again on the podcast, and we would want to also, pick his brain on some of the beautiful questions and the work what his research group is doing. So before we conclude, just give us a very brief gist of the questions you are asking in your lab, and also some recommendations of books, arts, and other things. Anything
Yeah.
you have in your mind? Yeah.
Thank you, Pavan.
Yeah.
So, in the broader context, since I started my lab here, I think I've tried to bring a few things together, with the broad idea how mechanics of mechanochemical molecules
Mm.
affects the uh, physiology of cells at a cellular scale. And we primarily focus on a couple of proteins. And I actually have a model here, which I
Ah,
don't know if I
ah.
can show it.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was
Please do,
it was
please do. That'll be wonderful.
presented to me by a colleague and a friend now. So
Mm, mm.
so these proteins are microtubules. So this is the microtubule. It's a
Nice, nice.
crystallography printed, 3D printed structure to
Mm,
scale, compared to this stuff. And these microtubules, ironically, I mean, this we're looking at is roughly, I guess, So if I measure this about 9 centimeters in diameter.
Yeah, can you show
In
it to the camera? It will be nice to
yeah.
if you bring it. Wow, fantastic. Yeah.
So this was presented to me by a friend in Tübingen, and these are X-ray crystallography data sets that are uh, that are
Nice.
combined using cryo-EM tomography, and they have a hole. I mean, this is indeed
Yeah.
the natural structure. It has a pretty sizable hole in it, and this is to scale, meaning to say that the wall diameter and the hole diameter are relatively correct in proportion. And these serve in cells as tracks for these proteins that are called motor proteins. And many of you have, I think, many of your audience, I think, I'm sure, have seen these beautiful videos of,
Yeah.
the cellular machinery walking and holding a cargo and pulling it against a load. And this is really the source that we are interested in of force generation, meaning to say, where one ATP molecule is consumed and this molecule walks one step, sort of like a kind of like a bipedal walker, actually. I mean, just like how we would walk leg over leg, foot after the other. There is a lot of detailed biochemistry and biophysics that still continues to be debated about the exact nature of the walk. Is it a slide? Is it a slip? How much does it backslide? And so we concern ourselves with this idea that while these single protein mechanics are important, what happens when we have collectives of them? Meaning to say, is the nature of these collective force generations purely additive, or is there something else going on? And we found again and again that strange things go on when we have more than one. So a lot of what we do is trying to make sense when we go from one to many. What is the outcome in terms of dynamics of force generation, transport, cell shape, and cell division? So we look at 2-3 systems. We are in experiments. We are typically purifying these proteins. These, as it so happens, are very easy to get from the brain of animals. We use food grade brains from butcher shops and start from there. And these motor proteins we purify using genetic engineering and recombinant DNA technology. We put them all together in a microscope slide that sort of looks, I guess, something like this. I mean, this is like a very bad example, perhaps, but and then we have reasonably high power microscopes,
yeah.
And together with fluorescence tagging, we can then see these molecules. I mean, despite the fact that in this 8-centimeter structure is only 20 nanometers in diameter in experiment. 20 nanometers is below the wavelength of visible light, and because of some tricks of diffraction, we can actually see them. So to understand the role that these mechanics plays in cells, we try to build up complexity from molecules, putting them together in clusters in larger and larger assemblies, and try in a way to reach the complexity that the whole cell indeed encompasses. We also nowadays we've been growing bacteria, E. coli, for a while, looking at similar proteins. There are evolutionarily related proteins to this tubulin called FTSZ. It doesn't matter, they divide the cell, and MREB, which are related to actin, and how they govern cell shape and division, because this is a very simple system to study. And more recently, in collaboration with experimentalists in France, we've started working with this really famous nematode, this worm called Coenorhabditis elegans. Also just one embryonic division, meaning to say when things are just one cell. And so that has taken us in the direction of combining biophysics with developmental and evolutionary biology. And this is something we're really excited about, because obviously evolutionary biology is driven by genetics and selection. But to answer a question that my master's professor once said in the passing at the end of an evolutionary biology lecture, he said, some people claim physical principles have a role, but it's not known really clearly. And so now we think we have an answer to some of those questions, and I'm really excited about this. So this is sort of the broad scheme. I'm sorry, it may have sounded like a lot of things. Our methods typically are biochemistry, microscopy, a lot of image analysis. And while, of course, we have a lot of tools already out there in the open source community, we also write our own code to analyze data and to make sense of it. And finally, for us, we integrate it using mathematical models. So we solve mathematical models numerically that have some very elementary mechanics and stochastic systems built into it. so what one might call angioedynamics,
Mm-hmm.
and that for us completes the circle of
Tackle of the.
what we call sort of model experimental testing, validation or
Mm.
rejection, and then hopefully some discovery. So yeah,
Wow,
that's
beautiful, beautiful. In fact, I would urge your listeners and viewers to have a look at the website of Chaitanya's. I would be linking that in the description and in the references what I generally share with the episode. There's a lot to really unpack in if you really go there.
yeah.
Literally, also.
And if I may add one
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
of the
Please.
latest books that I'm reading, I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
been
yeah. Your
prompted
recommendations.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
I've been prompted to read this
Hmm.
by a developmental biologist who wrote this. I just met him at
Master
a
build. No.
conference recently. This
Mm-hmm.
is called Master Builder by Alfonso Martinez Arias. He is an embryologist, I mean, in the very classical sense of a developmental biologist who discovered unusual properties of stem cells, these cells that can become any other cell type,
Mm,
uh, to form essentially the precursors to an embryo.
mm,
And that has led to amazing opening up a lot of possibilities to test drugs on human-like systems without actually having to work on animals.
mhm,
And in this, he argues that this idea of DNA centricity
mm,
of life may be oversimplified. And that's why this master builder makes an argument that cells may be the point at which all this information and complex biochemistry and biophysics and maybe even electrical transmission is integrated. And so he argues that maybe we need to study at this level of integration more intensely than we have so far. I mean, it in a way goes back to what we did earlier because we had no other tools available.
mm.
But what he's arguing is we need to do both. I mean, essentially, what in maybe technical terms we may call a multi-scale problem. We need to
Problem,
look at
right?
both, and ignoring one over the other may miss the forest for just looking at the individual trees.
Trees.
And so this is a kind of systems biology view, you may say. Oh, I mean, I don't like the word holism because it's much abused, but
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true,
but
true.
at a system level, at a
Mm,
cellular level. I mean, his point, and many of the other people, Dennis Noble is another one, who worked a lot on pacemakers in the early days of heart physiology, heart muscle
mm,
physiology.
mm, mm.
They've been making very strong arguments. And the popular book that is a counterpoint to this is, of course, one that many people, I mean, I read it as a student, called The Selfish Gene
Selfish gene, yeah, yeah.
by Richard Dawkins.
Richard
And their
Dawkins.
point is that the selfish gene perhaps may have oversimplified
Mm,
conceptually.
mm,
It's not that Dawkins is very well aware of
mm,
what happens beyond the DNA, but that maybe the selection element
mm,
may be at a higher scale, not necessarily just a gene. And there are, of course, ideas of epigenetics and then cellular influences and environmental crosstalk. So we need to maybe move our paradigm to more complexity and learn more
mm.
biology in order to make sense of things. That's, I guess. So this is the current book I'm still in the process of reading my way through, but yeah.
Fabulous, fabulous. This really also motivates a lot of people to really explore biology. It's such a rich subject, both in terms of concepts and also in terms of history and philosophy, so to speak,
I
because
agree.
a lot of questions are at that interface, and at the age and time where intelligence has now been not only spread across the natural but also into the artificial. Biology and understanding biology is a very crucial element. And taking a quantitative route is what Chaitanya and co-workers actually have been doing. So I thank Chaitanya for this fabulous, fabulous conversation. And as I have mentioned, this is not the only time we're going to have a conversation. Chaitanya is going to come back on the podcast subsequently, and we'll have many more conversations of this kind. And I'm looking forward to all those things
Thank
going
you,
forward.
Pawan, for having me. It's been such a delight. It's been so much fun.
It's my pleasure. This is Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. This time with the one and the only Chaitanya Athale. Thanks, Chaitanya.
Thank you very much.